Wertman is the author of the Seymour trilogy, which starts with Jane the Queen and The Path to Somerset, and her new one, The Boy King, which just came out like a day ago or something. So
September 30th, Wednesday.
Okay, perfect. So congratulations on your book release. And she is going to talk about the reign of Edward VI. And I am so glad that you are here. Welcome to TutorCon, and thank you for being here.
I am so glad to be here and talking about the Seymours, basically. So last year I did the talk not so much about Edward VI, but about all of the Seymours. And I opened up the talk with, okay, who hates the Seymours? And so many hands went up. It was good. But now more people are getting into the game. I'm going to be joined soon by Adrienne Dillard, who is also going to be trying to rehabilitate Jane. I know that Rebecca Larson is defending Tom, and she's going to have some issues with a bunch of the things I say here, and we'll walk a lot of them back in the talk right following. So, because of that, I might go a little bit further than I might have gone, knowing that you are going to be hearing from her right after that. But so far, I am the only person, other than Mark Twain, a very long time ago, to have given a voice to Edward VI. During his reign, the personal was the political, because all that stuff that kings do, Edward was too young. He came to the throne at age 9, so other people's actions defined his life. So we have Tom Seymour wanting power, doing risky things to get it. We have Somerset bungling a bunch of policies, being thrown apart by Northumberland. We have the switch from Spain to France as England's bestie, religious reforms that got undone by his successor, though the Book of Common Prayer lasted. We'll get to that. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of context. Yes, he died early, but Edward was a healthy baby, and we know this because everybody was watching him. You know, Henry VIII had been waiting for a son who was going to live, so everyone was looking at this kid, you know, is he going to live? So we have the reports that he suckled strongly from the outset, and, you know, he was a nice little chubby child. We also know that he was strong enough to shrug off a life-threatening quartan fever at age 4. Now, how he got that fever, Lord only knows, because Henry was a hypochondriac himself and had exacting standards of cleanliness and basically told everyone, this is England's most precious jewel, don't screw this up. But he got it, he got over it. This would have made his caretakers altogether extremely cautious. So there was a bunch of cosseting while he was among the women. And I use that phrase because Edward used it. It's a very Tudor thing. Until a child was 6 years old, they were raised exclusively by women. And then they turned 6 and they were breeched, meaning that they put on breeches if they were boys. And so at 6 is when a Tudor boy's education began. And coincidentally, when Edward turned 6, Catherine Parr had been married to Henry VIII for 6 months. And she had created this whole family hearth atmosphere that Henry really hadn't had with any of his other wives. Maybe Catherine of Aragon early on, but there was just Mary and Henry was wanting more. But so Catherine was also learned, and she, because of that, was trusted, was in a position, and she was able to select Edward's tutors, essentially, or at least recommend them. And she recommended very reformist tutors, Richard Cox and John Check. Now, when I say reformist, it was kind of like a wink and a nod, because everyone was exactly what Henry was at this time, but they turned out to be very reformist, and that really set Edward up as the reformist that he was. He was bookish and intellectual. That doesn't mean he didn't enjoy archery and tennis and riding. He did have a wild side. There's this wonderful story. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but there's this really great story shortly after he came to the throne, and they had him give knighthoods to 6 men from the city. And so he had the sword of state in his hand, and he looks at his friend Nicholas Throckmorton and says, "Want to be a knight?" And Nicholas is smart enough to say, I don't want other people to be jealous. This could be bad. You shouldn't. And Edward says, no, come here. I'm going to make you knight. I'm going to make you a knight. And chases him through the palace, sword of state, upraised in his hand. Come here, come here, come here. Manages to, give him the magic little tap on the shoulder, because that's what did it, guys, just a little tap. Manages to do that without drawing blood or anything like that. So that's how Nicholas Throckmorton got his knighthood originally. So Edward did have, could be possessed. He actually could have out-crazied Henry, but that's speculation for a different time. Anyway, he's 9. He gets to the throne. He's too young to rule himself. He's got to have others rule in his name. Now, his father had technically done this. In his will, he appointed a regency council where the council would do everything together. There was not going to be a single person who was going to take power. In the Tudor era, this was problematic because you really did need to look to a single person. So it was easy for people to believe, as Edward Seymour claimed immediately, that on his deathbed, Henry had changed his mind and wanted Edward to be protector. Edward Seymour was also helped in this because Henry had included in his will the unfulfilled gifts clause, basically saying that, I've made a bunch of gifts and bequests, but I may have left something out. If I have my executors have the right to fix that because they know my mind. And with this clause, Edward Seymour was able to get a lot of people to agree with him. Yes, you should be. So from now on, here's the wonderful part about this. I get to call Edward Seymour Somerset, which is important because there are a lot of Edwards in my talk. So from now on, Edward Seymour is Somerset. And he was the natural choice for a single person. He was family. He was the king's uncle, but he wasn't in a position to try to take the throne himself. Like the last Edward who would come to the throne as a minor, Edward V, whose uncle Richard III took it. So he was also, Somerset, the leader of the Protestant faction, and that was the only one left because shortly before Henry died, the Catholic faction blew up on a single day in November, which was pretty wild. So on that day, Henry knew he was sickly, didn't really want to admit he was dying, but wanted to make things easier, and was consolidating his properties to make them easier to manage on his son's behalf. And he looks at Stephen Gardiner, Bishop Stephen Gardiner, and says, "Trade me these lands." And Gardiner says, "No." That was kind of it for Gardiner. Gardiner gets thrown off the Regency Council, and Henry says, "I don't ever want to see that man's face again," and he never does. On the same day, Richard Southwell comes back and says, I was just over at the Earl of Surrey's house, and he's quartered the arms of Edward the Confessor with his. I think he wants to, Norfolk is going to try to take over the Regency Council after this, and probably. And then a couple of other people come forward to say, yeah, they promised me the chancellorship. So Surrey and Norfolk are imprisoned. Surrey gets executed. Norfolk escapes, literally the day, because, because when somebody is going to be executed, the constable of the tower comes back to let the monarch know, okay, arrangements are ready, shall we proceed? And the monarch has to say yes, but at this point, Henry was literally about to die a couple of hours later. He was comatose and wasn't able to give this authorization, so Norfolk's life was saved. That guy really did have 9 lives. Anyway, so Edward VI comes to the throne. Edward Seymour is now Duke of Somerset, Lord Protector. Edward had 2 uncles. Edward had Thomas Seymour as well. And Thomas Seymour expected to get a little bit more than what he got. So a little bit of backstory. Edward Seymour was the serious one, the oldest Seymour son, the heir. He was groomed for it, trained for it. He was a page to Mary Tudor at 14, knighted by the Duke of Suffolk during a military campaign in France at 23. He was master of horse to Henry Fitzroy at 25, esquire of the body to Henry at 31. He even accompanied Henry and Anne Boleyn to Calais in 1532 when they met Francis. That was a really small trip, so Edward Seymour was there. And then once Henry started hanging out with Jane so much, Edward was promoted to Gentleman of the Privy Chamber. When they got married, Edward became Viscount Beauchamp. When Jane had her son, he got the Earldom of Hertford. He joined the council. He proved his military pride. Edward Seymour was ready for this position. Thomas Seymour was the 4th son, not really expected to amount to much, described by Nicholas Throckmorton as fierce in courage, courtly in fashion, in personage stately, in voice magnificent, but somewhat empty of matter. You're going to be hearing a lot about him from Rebecca. She's going to kind of resent that, but this is the facts. Or this was what people said about him then. His basic rise was slower. Let's say he was made a gentleman of Henry's Privy Chamber, but really only started his career in 1538. Yes, he had ambassadorships, but there are some people who say that he only really got those because Henry was trying to keep him away from Catherine Parr. He was personable. He did make a really good ambassador, but he was never moved forward. There's even a story, apocryphal, but I love these stories, that Henry on his deathbed, they're talking about the Regency Council and somebody says, Thomas Seymour should be on the Regency Council. And Henry's lying there and he hasn't said anything in days, but that one makes him sit up to go, no. So, but Tom made it on anyway. And I did all this to show that there was really no way that Thomas Seymour could have become Lord Protector himself. He did not have the political support to do it, but he felt that he should have gotten more. Edward was made a duke and Tom was only made a baron, except that what that was it was the same inequality as when Henry was alive. It was just the ante was up. So Edward went from Earl to Duke, and Thomas went from Sir to Baron. So, you know, and he didn't get quite enough money. Resented it, and so Somerset says to him, okay, you can be Lord High Admiral too. Problem is that the then Lord High Admiral who had to vacate the post to give it to Tom was none other than John Dudley, who became Earl of Warwick. And John Dudley was a bit of a vengeful man, and he's the one who became Northumberland, and it is said that that's the point at which he decided that he was going to destroy both of the Seymour brothers, which some people believe he did. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject. And do you notice right now that I am doing what every other biographer has done? And it's one of the reasons that I wrote my book, is that I've talked about this entire story about Edward without once bringing him in. This is because, again, so much of his reign was he was hidden from it. And, you know, you kind of have to look and figure out, well, what was he thinking about all this? He liked, let's get real, he liked Tom better than he did Somerset, which is why Thomas Seymour really wanted to be governor of the king's person. Not governor of the council, that can be Somerset. He wanted to be governor of the king's person. Somerset said no. Tom Seymour starts to want more power, and he proposes to the council that he be allowed to marry Mary or Elizabeth. The answer is that's never going to happen. They say that Somerset's answer was, "We are neither of us meant to wed king's daughters." Now, interestingly, that would have happened right after Somerset got dissed by France. He wrote to Francis I to tell him about Henry's death, and he called him my brother. And Francis was just like, no, you're not. The King of England is my brother. You're just an uncle. But so there would have been that fear of overstepping. But anyway, Tom Seymour moves on and marries Catherine Parr very soon after Henry's death. When I say very soon, it was a few months, but most people expected her to keep in mourning for a couple of years. So yes, extremely soon. It was time. It was a wonderful thing. They had been in love before. Tom Seymour co-opts Edward. See, I'm bringing him in now. Tom Seymour co-opts Edward in this to try to soften everything because he knows he's going to get in trouble. So he says to Edward, well, who would you have me marry? To try to get him himself to come around to say, marry Catherine Parr. And instead, Edward says, marry my sister Mary to turn her Protestant. And Thomas Seymour said, that's probably a really bad idea. What would you think if I married your stepmother? Edward blesses it so that when the council finds out and gets angry and Risley wants to send Tom Seymour to the Tower, Tom's able to say, the king said it was okay. But you kind of have to wonder whether at that point Edward knew that he had been played a little bit, because he was really bright and he would have figured it out. And then a couple of other things happened. Tom and Catherine were married. They started their household. Catherine got pregnant. Elizabeth Tudor comes to live with them, and inappropriate things happened in the household. Tom Seymour would come in to wake her up very early in the morning while she was still in bed, would tickle her, and he'd come in his bare legs. It was really inappropriate. And Catherine Parr, she took the position that it was innocent, that anyone who said it was inappropriate was wrong, and she joined in a couple of times. Not really the wisest thing to do. She also supposedly held Elizabeth down while Tom Seymour said to her, you shouldn't be wearing black anymore, it makes you look too old, and slashed the gown so that she was left with pretty much exposed in the garden. Regardless, this is discovered, or Catherine discovers it, Elizabeth is sent from the household. I'm not sure at what point it really made it to court. It made it to court a little bit later, but interesting, I'm going to confess this. In my book, I had them find out earlier, just as gossip, because I didn't want everything conflated together. I wanted a little bit of, the next thing that happened was Catherine Parr died, and Thomas went off the rails, wanted his power, but he had lost so much of it, and decided that the way he was going to get it So first he tried to become Lord Protector by asking Edward to sign a piece of paper that said, just please favor my uncle's suit. And perhaps because of his previous experience, Edward says, no, if it's good, the Lords will allow it. And so at that point, Edward kind of did know that something was up. Doesn't work. Tom Seymour doubles down and breaks in, decides that he's going to try to get physical control of Edward, and breaks into his apartments in the castle in the middle of the night. And unfortunately for him, Edward had a dog, a wonderful dog that slept with him, and the dog heard the noise, woke up, started barking, and Tom Seymour killed the dog. Now, sorry, Rebecca, this pisses her off more than anything that I could do. It is possible that it was not Tom Seymour who killed the dog. It is possible that it was a servant that he was with, that went with him, that killed the dog. To me, the fact that anyone would kill the dog meant that you've got this guilty mind, you believe you're guilty. Otherwise, you'd actually be happy. If you're really trying to test security, which was the excuse that he used, if you're really trying to test the security, it's like, thank God, look how close I made it before this dog stopped me. And instead, they killed the dog. So to me, that proves whatever. At that point, there was no way for Thomas Seymour to escape his fate. There was a little bit of talk that his argument was with Somerset and not with Edward, so it wasn't quite treason, but John Dudley pushed it through. He gets executed, and that's it for the first uncle. The second uncle, because let's face it, the reign of Edward VI is all about betrayals over and over again, sets him up for the second betrayal, which is Somerset. Let's be real. Somerset, on Edward's behalf, made a lot of mistakes. He tried to push for a Scottish marriage, which would have been great. Edward VI, Mary Queen of Scots, they marry, they unite the two countries. Perfect. Unfortunately, Somerset continued Henry's policy towards the Scots and tried to woo them with an army. And that was like the famous Scottish line, we didn't like the manner of your wooing, and that pushes them into the arms of France. That's why Mary Queen of Scots ends up in France, is because Edward Seymour sent the army. That was a mistake. The war was expensive. That was another mistake. And meanwhile, the religious reforms, which is what Edward VI cared about the most, there were a bunch of changes. The churches got whitewashed and a lot of the superstition was taken away, but they didn't go terribly far because they wanted to give a chance to get people used to it. So as a result, you had a lot of people in the country, Edward VI included, thinking that they weren't going far enough. And a lot of the country, the Catholics, thinking that they had gone way too far. So nobody was happy, and nobody was happy with anything. Dudley, meanwhile, Somerset is not paying attention to the council. Dudley's getting angry. He's starting to take control. And Somerset does what Tom Seymour did before him and decides that he's going to take physical control of the boy, grabs Edward and takes him off to Windsor. Now, this part of the story ends differently because Edward believed that this was necessary. Edward believed that Somerset was trying to keep him safe, and Edward actually got to wave a little knife in front of the crowd and go, "Are you with me? Protect me!" And right before they ride away. So he saved Somerset from this part of the downfall, let him get back onto the council, and that's when things started to mess up. John Dudley did not really want to share power. John Dudley had gotten rid of Somerset initially, thrown him into the Tower. Tried to bring back Henry's majority rule, everybody has an equal voice. That didn't work for the same reason that Somerset became Lord Protector in the first place. But Dudley takes the title Lord President of the Council, which is the same power, but less in your face. And so I didn't mention the enclosures. I'm sorry. One of the big problems the thing that really pushed the matter over the edge with Dudley and with the nobles was that Somerset was against the land enclosures. Basically, in feudal times, you had all of the common lands were owned by the nobles, but the common people were entitled to grow crops. And that was really important because it meant that they were able to eat. They sold a little bit of it, but that was nowhere near as profitable as it was to enclose the land and raise sheep. After Henry's death, there had been really bad harvests, and there were famine and starvation throughout the land. So as people were enclosing their lands, it was making the problem worse. John Dudley had the fences that he had built around his land forcibly removed. And it was at that point that he really started going after Somerset. Somerset takes Edward to Windsor, gets back, but John Dudley just keeps his eyes on destroying Somerset, which he ends up getting his chance. Somerset was good for a while, but because people tend to love underdogs, there came a point at which people started listening to him again and again, and Dudley got nervous, so he invented a plot basically the idea was that Somerset was going to hold a big banquet and invite his enemies to the banquet, and as they sat down, they would be killed. It was a very Game of Thrones. I think there was a plot line like that on Game of Thrones, but thankfully they discovered the plot. They even found a peasant that had a vision that, oh, ye whom the king most trusts will betray him, and that was said to mean Somerset. So Somerset is tried and convicted, but it still looks like he's going to get out of it. And so something happens at that point. John Dudley has been, what he did with Edward was different than what Somerset did, because John Dudley pretended that Edward was doing everything. And he didn't just pretend. He would visit him at night in a private room, and they would discuss what they were going to do in the council the following day, so that Edward would know everything, could practice stuff, and could sound really smart in front of anyone else. And this was the ultimate opportunity for Dudley, who at this point had become Duke of Northumberland. This was the ultimate opportunity for Northumberland to manipulate things. So he says to Edward, with Somerset, you're too close to the matter. Let the council decide. So Edward writes out his instructions to the council. And what he says is, please determine Somerset's sentence, that by his punishment, example may be shown to others, meaning that, or leaving open the possibility of a fine or other punishment. Somebody, between the time that Edward writes this and the instructions are given to the council, somebody has inserted the words that by his punishment and execution according to the laws, example may be shown to others. Meaning that it looked clear that Edward was asking for Somerset to be executed, and the council came back and said, execute him. Now, did Edward ever discover that change? I don't know. I actually think he did, because what we have is this situation a couple of months after Somerset's execution. The court is playing at archery, and that was like one of the big things. And Northumberland is one of the shooters, and he shoots, and it was a lousy shot. And Edward very casually just looks at him and goes, you aimed better when you cut off the head of my uncle Somerset. So, so he knew that Northumberland was behind something. And that was, so he did know something was up. Whether he knew that he had been completely played was a different story. But that was the second betrayal, which sets us up to the third one, which Edward was betrayed by his own body. Like his stepbrother, Henry Fitzroy, like his uncle, Arthur Tudor, his 15-year-old lungs developed a malady that killed him. And that's where he panicked. So let's go back into his point of view. He is, he's pro-reform. Now, at his coronation and throughout, they referred to him as England's Josiah. And this was a reference to Josiah, who became king of Judah at age 8, and was the one who removed all of the pagan temples from throughout the land. And it was a wonderful thing. Isn't this great? You know, we 8, 9 coming to the throne, removing pagan temples. This is this England's Josiah. Here's the problem. The second part of the story that nobody ever talks about is the fact that after Josiah died, all of the reforms were reversed. Edward would have been sitting there thinking, I'm going to die, and Mary is going to come to the throne, and all my reforms are going to be reversed. This can't be. So it was in this frame of mind that he starts to frame his device for the succession. And the device for the succession involves skipping over Mary and skipping over Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth was a Protestant princess, skipping over the two of them and going directly to Francis Grey. We do know that he originally wrote his device for the succession when he thought he was going to live. Because if you read it, there are a whole bunch of things that, you know, Francis Grey, he left the throne. He was looking so desperately for a male heir. He left the throne to Francis Grey's male heirs, if she has any before my death, or to anybody who has a male heir before my death in that side of the family. But as he got worse, things had to get a little bit more practical. And so as his health deteriorated, all of a sudden, Northumberland gets incredibly opportunistic, and they figure out that, okay, we're going to implement this idea on May 21st, and Edward is about to die in July. On May 21st, there is a triple wedding, and Lady Jane Grey is married to Northumberland's son, Guilford Dudley. Catherine Dudley is married to Henry Hastings, the heir to the Earldom of Huntingdon, and Catherine Grey is married to Lord Herbert, the heir to the Earldom of Pembroke. And this way, these unions give Northumberland powerful and committed allies. Meanwhile, they're pushing everything they can through the council and through the legal system. This is where a lot of people say that Edward VI was poisoned, and that's why he died. He didn't die because he was poisoned. Northumberland did give him arsenic, and he did that to keep him alive for as long as they needed to get the legalities done. Because remember, the Act of Succession through which Mary was going to inherit had been ratified by Act of Parliament. So you can't just have the council or the king say, I'm going to change this. You need something a little bit more than that. What they did was, because there wasn't time to go to Parliament probably would have said no, they took the issue to the judges of the King's Bench, which was the land's highest court, with jurisdiction over all cases involving the crown. Its records could get reviewed by Parliament, but by the time Parliament got around to reviewing it, the damage would have been done, or the good deed would have been done, and everything would have been fine. The judges weren't stupid. They got a pardon for their treason in advance, because it was treason to mess with the succession like that. And with this advance pardon, they went ahead and said, Jane Grey. At that point, Northumberland didn't need him anymore, and the arsenic stopped, and Edward was able to die, and which he did. And spoiler alert, his plan didn't work. It was a tragedy all around: his life, his death, his unfulfilled dreams, and everything. It was a tragedy. Questions? Sorry about that.